I'll be speaking to Mike Alowitz, retired professor of mural painting at Central Connecticut State University, an agitprop artist whose murals have been painted in many countries of the world, founder of Red Square Gallery and Museum in New London, and most importantly for our purposes today, an eyewitness to the killings of students at Kent State University on May 4th, 1970. Good morning, Mike.
Good morning, Sam. Good to be here today.
You've been taking part in programs about the Kent State Massacre for many years, and you have one coming up Saturday, May 4th. Could you describe it?
Well, I have spoken a lot about Kent in a lot of commemorations over the years. Of course, as the years have gone on, there have been fewer opportunities, but we always do something here. I'm officially canceled from the official commemorations at Kent State and always have been written out of those. But what we'll do here, and pretty much what we've done every year, is first of all, to show what happened that day. There were a lot of photographers present. We have good photo documentation, and it shows exactly what happened. The fact that the National Guard was sent onto campus and fired on peacefully protesting students. And it was a massacre, and it's all been very well documented. More importantly than that is we put it into the framework of what was going on at the time, which was a massive opposition to the war in Southeast Asia. On April 30th of 1970, Richard Nixon went on TV and announced the invasion of Cambodia, and that initiated massive protests all across the country, centered on college campuses. And we were beginning to organize around that. We'd had many mass demonstrations at Kent, organized mostly by the Student Mobilization Committee against the war. And what happened was that there were a series of rallies, protests, whatever. The ROTC building, under very strange circumstances that basically looked like the work of agent provocateurs, was burned down. It was an old wooden structure that was scheduled for demolition. But nonetheless, Governor James Rhodes of Ohio used it as a pretext to send in the Ohio National Guard to occupy campus. They were in the area because they had previously been called out against a Teamster strike that was going on in Cleveland. Mm-hmm. So on May 3rd, he held a much heralded press conference and denounced the students as outside agitators, as the worst people in America. And he said that they were going to eliminate the problem that existed at Kent. And his attempt at eliminating...
Before you go further, I just want to get the event that you're going to do Saturday. Mention the place and the time, just so people could attend.
Yeah. The event is going to be here at Red Square. Red Square is our informal studio, gallery, and museum of agitprop art in New London, Connecticut. And you can view Red Square virtually by going to our website, which is redsq.org, redsquare.org. And we're going to hold the event here, but you can also watch virtually, and the links are at the website.
And we'll put that on under the YouTube. We'll connect there too.
Yeah.
So I apologize. And that's at 4 o'clock. Am I right about that?
4 o'clock. Yes, 4 o'clock on Saturday, May 4th.
So I cut you off there. So you were talking about the governor and denunciation of students. The National Guard is in, and then what happens?
And basically, there was a largely unorganized but peaceful demonstration taking place in a free speech area on the campus. It was called the Commons. You didn't need a permit or anything. So what we were doing was completely peaceful and legal. The National Guard ordered us to disperse, after which they began a barrage of tear gas, broke up the demonstration, chased us over the hill called Blanket Hill. And on the other side of the hill, demonstration had been dispersed, everybody had been gassed. They turned around and fired at the students, mostly who were hundreds of feet away, but killed 4, wounded 9, left 1 student paralyzed for life. It was just a slaughter, and it was clearly set up and designed to attempt to intimidate the unfolding student strike that was going on across the country. They wanted to make an example to students. They wanted to scare students into not protesting. And it was, unfortunately, listening to somebody like House Speaker Mike Johnson going to Columbia and saying it may be time for the National Guard is clearly a threat, and it should be taken seriously, that they want to try to repeat what they did in May of 70. They hoped that by waging repression against the students, that they would end the movement. And what's going on these campuses today, where they're going in and arresting students for trespassing on their campuses where they pay a lot of money to go to school, on their own campuses, they are trying to instill fear in people. And just as in 1970, they have sadly misjudged the situation. Students are not being intimidated. The encampments are spreading. The demonstrations are growing. The movement is alive and well. And I'm very proud of these kids for what they're doing and standing up for themselves, for their right to organize, and to end the genocide that this government and the Israeli government are waging against the people of Gaza.
Have you been able to visit any of the protests in the East? Is there maybe in
Only via the internet. And it's a wonderful thing that we have. In May of 1970, none of this existed. You didn't know what was going on. I was an eyewitness to the massacre, and afterwards, I traveled around the country. I would speak at various locations. We had a group called the Committee of Kent State Massacre Witnesses, including the mass rally in Washington, D.C. on May 9th, where Coretta Scott King and Jane Fonda and a bunch of other people spoke. And I gave a report on what had happened. That's what you had to do. You had to travel to places to explain what had happened and it was an amazing experience. I had a firsthand view of the unfolding strike because I would go onto a campus and there would be thousands of students. There would be giant rallies, people discussing, arguing, debating about the war, and shutting down the universities. There were about 4 million students who participated. Over 400 campuses were actually occupied by students. Students began to take control of the universities, and it was a great moment in recent history.
Yeah, you mentioned student strikes. I don't think we've had that yet. I mean, there's been people have set up tents on lawns and so on. And today they went into a university building in Columbia, the same one they occupied in 1968, and renamed it Hind Hall after the 6-year-old Palestinian girl who was murdered in Gaza. But they haven't got up to the level of student strike yet.
Yes, I saw the unfurling of the banner there, and it was a beautiful thing to see. It reminded me, I ended up in Austin, Texas, and where we renamed I think it was the LBJ fountain, their big fountain. We named it, we renamed it Peace Fountain, and from that point on, it was always known as Peace Fountain.
We're gonna have
No,
to
you're
break in
right.
here. We're gonna have to break
Huh?
in here because you said LBJ. Now everybody now thinks you're talking about LeBron James, the basketball player. Was there a president named LBJ?
There was Lyndon Baines Johnson,
Oh yes,
who we drove from office, just
yes,
as we
yes.
drove Richard Nixon from office. The anti-Vietnam War movement was it profoundly not only changed this country, but it changed the world. It changed the world. It put an end to the days when wars were celebrated, when they marched troops down the streets and bands played and people cheered and young men all signed up to go. That was done in by the anti-Vietnam War movement and particularly by the GI anti-war movement, because that's how the war was really ended when the soldiers refused to fight in Vietnam and they turned on the government. Um, you're right that this is not yet a mass student strike. This is a symbolic thing that's going on. And I think, it's going to have to move beyond that. It's a symbolic thing that involves a relative handful of students. When you think about it, a few hundred students on each campus, where you have a campus of 10 or 20, whatever, thousand students. It's a relatively small number, but it is enjoying the support, I believe, of the majority of students. The majority of students are in support, maybe not in support of this particular action or that particular action, but clearly they are questioning and calling for an end to the genocide. And the students of the United States have stepped forward, and where the administrators of colleges and politicians and the rest of the parasites that rule us have failed in the most basic kind of human morality, the students have stepped forward and said, we are not going to do this. We are not going to allow this to continue. It's
Well,
a
thanks for.
wonderful,
I'm sorry, you were saying.
it's very inspiring to see these students.
Thanks for speaking with me, and a reminder to viewers to attend or to watch on Zoom the May 4th event that Mike Alowitz is presiding over at 4 p.m. We'll have the address of Red Square and the Zoom link in the comments under this video on YouTube. I'd also direct viewers' attention to the homepage of Promoting Enduring Peace, where the group connects to the upcoming events and, like Mike, warns that calls for the National Guard to break up protests are calls for murder. It also links to a number of interviews I've done with Mike Alowitz about Kent State and other matters over the years. See the site, pepeace.org. Thank you, Mike Alowitz.
Thank you, Stanley. Thank you for all the good stuff that you do with your program.